So today we're going to be talking about philosophy, which is why I decided to ham-fistedly play a Bach Prelude, since it is fittingly pretentious. Especially from someone like me, who basically just kind of programmed it into himself by muscle memory and not any actual musical understanding. I laugh awkwardly, forcefully, to cover the fact that I have no idea what I'm doing. So, yesterday I talked a brief bit about the introduction to Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy, and I went on a bunch of caveats about orthodoxy and such. But today I'm even more pressed for time because my start times at work are 2 a.m. and it is a Sunday, and that means tomorrow's a Monday, and I'm going to work in a few hours. So I was actually at a Mexican restaurant just now, having myself a grand old cerveza, one of those things in the big mugs, and I was thinking, goodness, that was a mistake. I should have had just one. But the reason I got that big one was because, but if I had just one, then I would feel like having a second one, and I might as well go ahead and do this because this might actually be more cost efficient. And I don't know. Are these philosophical questions? Perhaps, perhaps not. Let's find out what philosophical questions are, shall we? All right, the problems of philosophy. The introduction is by Hugh Kyung Kim, which I assume is a Korean person, and let's see what he has to say about the problems of philosophy. At what point he quotes Bertrand Russell, who this book is actually by saying, Russell gives us an answer to the first question. On the very first page, he says that philosophy is merely the attempt to answer ultimate questions, not carelessly and dogmatically as we do in ordinary life and even in the sciences, but critically, after exploring all that makes such questions puzzling, and after realizing all the vagueness and confusion that underlie our ordinary ideas. So there's a lot of things that we take for granted, and these are called axioms. Axioms are things from which we derive everything else. If you're familiar with geometry, you're familiar with axioms. Geometry is basically a mathematical form of philosophy, and in fact, I would argue that mathematics is philosophical in nature. Now, some people might be like, oh, but it's so exact, so precise, and philosophy is the realm of wishy-washy nonsense. Well, my friends, mathematics is the most ideal, one of the most ideal things that you can have, because there is no such thing as pure number. The numeric interrelation is something that exists completely on the mental plane, which is precisely why I believe Bertrand Russell tried to make a jab at unifying all of mathematics by saying that it can all be explained and derived from pure logical interconnections. However, I believe he failed to do so, but the fact remains that mathematics is an abstraction. There is no such thing as a perfectly straight line, etc. ad nauseum. Yay? Yay. So, continuing on, what I'm basically doing, my point in talking about Bertrand Russell's work and philosophy in general is, I think that we need to become acquainted with these topics, and I believe that as an English speaker, one of the best that I have available to me in terms of philosophy and its description is given by Bertrand Russell. There might be a lot of people that take exception to that, but again, YouTube is open. You can go ahead and throw your 2 cents out there. Yes. So let's continue right along and talk about fancy words like epistemology. That's the concept I'm really going to be presenting today. And I always forget what exactly epistemology is, but I think it has something to do with knowledge. You see, I've been looking at this word forever, and it always escapes my mind because it's so removed from daily life. Who the hell thinks about a word like epistemology? What kind of friggin' nerdo even cares? Why should you care? Well, let's go over here, epistemology definition, and look it up. So, knowledge is the branch of philosophy concerned with the theory of knowledge. Now, what the hell does that mean, the theory of knowledge? Well, I think it basically breaks down to what is it that we can, in fact, know? And how is it that we come to know? And how do we know the things that we know? Okay, so. Pressing for time. So this, I believe, are epistemological questions that are being discussed here. So, although Russell tackles some metaphysical problems and the problems of philosophy, in the main, the book is focused on epistemological problems. Lo and behold, I was right. In the first 4 chapters, he argues that things exist independently of the mind. And that is very important because there were people that thought that basically, and I believe that those are the existentialists, that things only exist based upon our perception, something to that extent. But I could be wrong about that in terms of the existentialists, eh? So, of the mind, and that we can't have knowledge of them. While he undoubtedly sees something when he looks at the table in front of him, Russell says what he sees is what is immediately known in sensation. That is a sense datum, the sort of thing common to the veridical perception of tables and to dreams of tables. Sense data of qualities we're acquainted with include color, e.g. red, texture, e.g. smooth, sound, e.g. shrill, and smell, e.g. rancid. Since sense data depend on people's minds for their existence, they are subjective. And since each person experiences his or her own sense data and couldn't experience anyone else's, you can experience a red sense datum as indistinguishable from mine. Indistinguishable. Why am I having trouble with that word? Words are hard. Indistinguishable from mine, but not one and the same sense datum as mine. Sense data are necessarily private. The conclusion Russell draws from this is that it's not necessarily a material object, a mind-independent object that he sees when he looks at a table. The existence of the table, a material object in public space, is problematic. Maybe it doesn't exist at all. Maybe whatever exists, or at any rate, whatever can be known to exist, is mind-dependent. Russell goes on to argue, however, that even though sense data cannot exist independently of mind, that doesn't make them mental. In other words, that sense data depend on minds for their existence doesn't mean that they are parts of minds or inherently mental in nature. And I think that's a rather obvious thing, but when you look at it, you kind of have to go ahead and say, hey, we've got to lay this out, because there are ways to make a case that this is just something that I'm perceiving. What if we're all brains in a vat? And all of that kind of philosophy 101, clappity trappity dappity doop. So, I thought it was also an interesting distinction that was just made, that yes, we have the objective sense data, or as in, we have a common indistinguishable sensation of the color red, for instance, but because it exists in 2 different minds, they're still both private, and there's that subtle variation that makes them both subjective. Woo. So, again, touching very briefly on some ideas, putting them into your head, and I will continue this as I go along. Right now, it is 7 o'clock, which means that I have 6 hours to sleep. Isn't that great? Isn't that lovely? Cheers, everybody. Oh, but before I go, one of the things in my maybe mid and late teens that I had on the brain was, oh, well, we'll figure out things. I'm going to do this, to study this grand thing, not so much for the sake of grandeur, but because it's so interesting that the thing is grand, therefore it is lovable, therefore you just want to go on and climb that mountain. So I was thinking, well, how is it we're going to come to an understanding of the world, to its fundamental operation, and why should we do that? And my answer was, we should do that because it will help us to derive all sorts of new technologies and new insights and new ethics and ways of dealing with the world. And I thought that I could do that through neurology, because at that time I had discovered the popular neuroscience books by Antonio Damasio, and I thought, oh, if we study the brain and all of that. And then I came to the realization that even the best neurologists are often at a loss for explaining a lot of things, and that sure, we should always try to push those frontiers, but ultimately I think there's a lot of questions that will remain unanswered. So there we go. There's a little bit of extra that's just thrown in there, slightly autobiographical, which makes it, I suppose, more approachable and more easily passable through that barrier in the brain there. I don't know. I don't know very many things. And that is why I aim to find out. Come along on the journey with me. As you can see, I am a bit manic at the moment because I am thinking about how very difficult it's going to be for me to fall asleep. Anyhow, take care. Cheers. Goodbye. All that stuff.